So welcome everybody to the penultimate etc. interview in our 6-part online series. As you may know, these talks are run by Draw Brighton and they're funded by our very generous supporters on Patreon. So we conceived this monthly series, with art students in mind. We were aiming to provide a better perspective on the routes that art and design professionals have taken from their early lives and education through to their current careers. And as always, this talk will be recorded and posted to our YouTube channel alongside our earlier talks, which include talks with fine artists, illustrators, sculptors, and a wide range of other creative professionals. But tonight, I am very lucky to be joined by Simon Martin, curator, writer, and director of Pallant House Gallery in Chichester. So Simon, welcome. It's lovely to have you.
Hello, thank you. Thank you. It's great to join you this evening.
Now, I'm going to launch in pretty swiftly as we seem to be filling up, so that's great. And as all of these talks are intended to help students connect their lives now with the idea of what their future career could be, I'd just like to ask you a bit more about the journey that you took to becoming director of a major gallery. I imagine few students would give gallery director as their intended future career, so I just wondered if you'd be able to start by giving us a bit of a walkthrough of your life and what led you to the position you're in now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of those things when I was at school, I think we all do those quizzes that are supposed to kind of tell you exactly what you're going to be in the future. And I remember doing those and it coming up with writer. I think there was kind of archaeologist was one of them, diplomat. And curator, and there are a number of other things that teacher I think was another one. But I was always very, very interested in art, and I think from a really, really early age, from as a child, I used to love drawing, and at school I my school I was often winning art prizes for drawing and painting and things like this, which but in a way it kind of I mean, the other thing is, as a child, I mean, I put some slides together, and I wonder whether I should talk through the slides to give some visuals to this. But as a child, I really wanted to become a priest more than anything, and I wanted to become a vicar, which is like most kids want to become an astronaut or a train driver, whatever, and that was what I really, really wanted to be as a teenager. And in a weird way, I think all of those things come together in the role of being a curator and now a museum director, because it's about learning, it's about creating a sense of community, it's about being diplomatic, it's about doing research, and it's about writing, and it's about personal relationships a lot of the time. It's about relationships with artists, with collectors, with members of the public, and actually also all of your colleagues. And so I think all of these things are absolutely at the heart of what I've ended up doing. So shall I open these slides, or I don't know?
That would be great. Yeah.
Let me try.
I love seeing your living room.
We were just saying how it looks like I am actually in my living room, but it looks like it's some kind of weird projection.
I'm pretty sure your living room is actually officially available as a Zoom background, and many people use it.
Right. Oh, there's a photograph here by and I'm now going to completely forget his name. Brighton-based photographer, but I will let me see how to move these forward. There we go. I was going to start. I mean, just saying. I mean, I wanted to be a priest when I was a child. This is actually the village I grew up in Norfolk, in a place called Horning, in the middle of the Norfolk Broads. As you can see, Norfolk is very, very flat. But I think this kind of created a real sense of place for me growing up, and I think it was kind of quite important to me, that kind of growing up in the countryside. And it's strange in a way. I'm now living in the city, but I think I've always, from an early age, loved architecture and history. And I remember going to this churchyard as a child and drawing the Gothic doorways, and really kind of being absolutely kind of fascinated. I used to kind of cycle up there, and my primary school is kind of, you can see it in the distance and across the fields. So it was very much a kind of rural childhood. And then this was my school that I went to, a place called Langley, and I don't show it because it was a kind of grand country house, but actually because it again connected with my own interest in art and architecture. And one of the things was I was very, I mean, it was a very, very sporty school, and I wasn't particularly sporty, but you also had to do things like um, go into the army and the navy and the scouts, and I kind of went into the navy. And but I also was became a joined the school library, and I used to spend hours in the library. And this is the library on the left hand side, which had this incredible ceiling. But I discovered that my grandmother had been in service in the 1930s, and this is her, Madeline Theodora May Bartram. She'd been the third housemaid, and I found this photograph of her in her albums with her, and she didn't really want anyone to know, and it became our kind of secret. But it gave me this extraordinary connection to the place in a way that wasn't about I mean, it's very much a kind of socially mobile story, in that going from my grandmother in service, and then of course during the Second World War she had married and gone into nursing. But I really wanted to do art history, and my school didn't do art history. I mean, I did art and things like this, and so I ended up going to an adult education centre. And I think my next slide is Sister Wendy Beckett, because I had her story of painting, and it got me interested in art history, and it got me interested in, and there was this TV series that she did in the 1990s called Sister Wendy's Grand Tour and Sister Wendy's Odyssey, where she'd go around all of these galleries in Italy and Europe. And I just thought this was absolutely extraordinary. And when I was 16, I went with my parents to Italy, and we went on this trip that started in Venice. We went to Padua, we went to Assisi, we went down to Rome and Gubbio, and then down to Sorrento and Florence, and it made me want to do art history. Essentially, I absolutely loved it. And so because my school didn't do art history, I went to this evening class, and I did an A-level in art history in my lower sixth, and my school was furious with me because they thought it was distracting me from doing my English, history, and geography, my proper subjects, as they, thought. But I did this, and actually it's made me very passionate about saving the art history A-level, a couple of years ago, because I think in a way this suddenly put me in with a group of adults of all kinds of ages, backgrounds, etc. And we were talking about art on a weekly basis, and I was basically having to teach myself the special subject, which was high Renaissance and mannerism. And I got this kind of A-level. Anyway, I then went on a gap year, and I went to southern India. And I raised the money. I worked in a department store, and I wrote to lots of trusts and foundations and raised the money to spend 6 months in India. And I went to Melkote, which is it's a Vaishnavite pilgrimage town in South India. And this was the center of a place called the Janapada Seva Trust, which was a Gandhian community. It was run by this extraordinary guy called Surendra Kaulagi. It was, as you can see, I mean, it's like literally oxen and very, very basic village community, but it had a printing press which had been funded by Oxfam, and it had a small library which I sorted out for them with all their Gandhian books, and it had a school in the village for disabled children and also village children. So this is, and I lived on an organic farm which had a weaving center, and this is me with some of the children from the surrounding farms who dropped out of learning. So their parents were all illiterate, so they were first generation learners, and I was teaching them English and art, and so these are some of them. And I lived in the building you can see in the background. I mean, it was incredibly basic, but very, very formative for me in terms of believing in art and social, the importance of kind of social work and building communities. And these were some of the children that I used to go and teach. And there was a lot of rural polio at that point in time. I mean, it's now been eradicated, but you can see a lot of them were on calipers and crutches, and it was extremely basic, but an incredible experience. And so then after that, I went to university, and I went to Warwick University, and it was a 1960s campus university. So as you can see, a lot of concrete. Not after living on a farm in India was very, very different. But actually, what was brilliant about the course, the art history course at the University of Warwick, is that all around the campus was great 1960s art, and it had the Warwick Art Centre. And you can see, this is the Lillian Lynn Cohen that used to rotate on the campus. But I got very involved with the Mead Gallery on site. And so every week I would spend a day working in the gallery as a gallery assistant. I then started working in the offices, and I started doing tours for local schools. And so they would bring children onto the campus, and we would take them around and look at a lot of the 60s art and find ways of engaging them. But also there is still, she's still there, Sarah Shalgoski, this inspirational curator. And she would get students like myself involved with actually hanging the exhibitions. And they used to get a lot of Arts Council touring exhibitions. And this was an exhibition on the right. There was an exhibition of Magnum women photographers. And in my third year, she basically handed me a section of the exhibition and said, you curate it. And so I got to hang, as a student, part of an exhibition. And I was learning about how do you think about these things? How do you handle artworks and things like that? And so those experiences of essentially volunteering, but volunteering to do things I wanted to do, were really important. And in my holidays, I did various internships and work experience. So one of those was working for Sotheby's, and I worked in the Victorian and Modern British department of Sotheby's, and I was cataloguing, British pictures, and again sorting out their, like my librarian kind of background came in, and they got me to sort out the whole department library. But also, one of the things, whilst I was going through some of the racks in the basement, I found this painting by Glyn Philpott, which got me kind of thinking, because I'd never heard of him before, and there was this extraordinary painting, which kind of I'm going to come back to in a bit. And then in my third year, and one of the reasons I went to the University of Warwick was because in your third year, the entire year from the history of art and also the medieval history department all moved to Venice for a term, and we had flats around the city, and we were in the kind of Fondazione Corini Stampalia. So in our second year, we had learnt, we'd been taught Italian for art historians. And so we arrived in Venice, and then every week you would have a trip to a different city. And so you'd be doing your seminars, presenting. So one time I had to present in Tintoretto's Scuola Grande to San Rocco. So literally I would be standing in front of this, presenting to all my fellow students in front of the actual artwork. And it was amazingly inspirational to have that kind of direct contact with extraordinary masterpieces. And one week we went to Padua, another week we were in Verona, another week we went to Mantua, and so on. And I think in a way, one of the things I would say is that I've always believed that importance of art throughout the centuries, of Renaissance art, of contemporary art, of modern art, and my special subject was Venetian Renaissance. But at the same time, I came back and I was doing my dissertation on Norman Foster's Sainsbury's Centre and ideas of display and ideology, and the problems around the representation of non-Western kind of non-Western art, often kind of tribal art from Africa and Oceania. And this is the interior, the extraordinary interior of the Sainsbury's Centre. And it was perfect for me because this is in Norfolk, near where I lived. So I could go there a lot to the University of East Anglia during my holidays and kind of work on this. And then I graduated, fortunately, I had got a scholarship to go to the Courtauld, and this is me graduating by the Cohen again with various of my friends. But I also managed to get a placement to go to the Guggenheim and do a student internship at the Guggenheim. And so this is the Peggy Guggenheim collection in Venice, with this incredible modern art collection of Italian modern art. And me in Peggy Guggenheim's glasses in her garden, working in the coat check, because you had to do everything. You had to kind of sell tickets, you had to do coat checks, and you had to give talks about Peggy Guggenheim and her life. And one of the amazing things about it was that there were students from all over the world, and so there were art students, there were quite a few of my fellow students are now running other museums, and so it's kind of created this great network in a way. And so I've got friends still in New York and other places from there. And then I went to the Esterick collection to do a short placement, which is it's a collection of Italian modern art in London. And then I went to the Courtauld Institute to do the MA, and again a kind of very grand piece of architecture. But I mean, I was actually living in Bromley by Bow in the scuzziest flat going, and so there's kind of really weird disconnect often in my life between where I was living and where I was studying. But what I focused on, I mean, that course looked particularly at European modern art and politics, and it had the longest title in the world, which was Europe, Nationalism and Internationalism, Cultural Identity in European Art, 1906 to 1945. But there was a lot about things like communism and art, primitivism and Matisse and things like this. And when I was trying to think about what to write about for my master's, I was walking down Bond Street and I saw this painting on the left, which was the one I had catalogued in the racks at Sotheby's. And I thought, oh my God, there's that painting again. And I went in and found, and I was then thinking, oh, I should see whether there's more information about this artist. It's really interesting because I was writing about Matisse and colonialism and Pablo Picasso, and I was thinking about this representation of non-Western subject matter by European artists, and I then did my master's dissertation on Glyn Philpott and his representation of Black subjects in the 1930s. And what particularly interested me was he as a homosexual man in the 1930s, but also creating incredibly sensitive, non-prejudiced images at a time when there was a huge amount of prejudice in the imagery, in advertising and kind of wider culture. And so this is what I kind of focused on. And that in a way also connected me, because then I was looking for jobs, and I started looking for assistant curator jobs, and I saw one at Tate Modern. I had an interview, well, I didn't actually take the interview, but I was invited for an interview at Sotheby's for their graduate scheme. But I got interviewed for Pallant House Gallery, and when I went to the interview, there was a Philpott hanging in the gallery, and I was like, oh wow, I mean, and had this interview. I was offered the job, and it was a bit of a, I'd been living in the East End of London to then move to a cathedral city in Sussex, which I really didn't know. But the only, and this is the Philpott, which and I got to know I'd got to know the niece of Glyn Philpott, who lived in Brighton and became a friend. And she died a year later and then bequeathed the painting to Pallant House Gallery, which is rather lovely. And so I've kind of felt this connection to this work, but also this Gino Severini dancer. And when I'd been at the Guggenheim, they had an exhibition of Severini and the Dance, and I'd seen this painting on the right, and on the label it said Pallant House Gallery, Chichester, and I thought, where's this place that's got extraordinary, you know, Italian futurist works like this? And I didn't even know where Chichester was. And anyway, so this, of course, was in the collection of Pallant House Gallery, and of course now, now I'm at the gallery. So that's a very, very brief then to now story. But I thought, you know, because there's quite a lot of students here, I thought actually to really focus on that, because I think I learned a huge amount in that time through volunteering, through trying to take any opportunity I could get to get placements and things like that during that time. And I think, you know, it was really, really formative. And of course, since then, I've been in the same organization, although it's changed a huge amount in those subsequent years. You know, essentially the core place, you know, here, this Queen Anne townhouse has been the same place for me.
It's so interesting to see those threads going all the way back to you sorting through your school archives and finding all of those pictures that then link to, you know, an interest in history, in visual arts, but then also in personal histories. I mean, it's lovely it links to you, but I think actually meeting you and talking to you, Simon, has given me a great insight into what it means to be a curator, because to be honest, before that, I really didn't have a good understanding of the almost like the character that it takes to want to arrange art and have a passionate engagement with the observation of art without making it, because yes, I mostly know makers, and it's really interesting to see that how those threads kind of link back. Do you find people understand the role of the curator well enough?
It's an interesting one. When I first started to be an assistant curator, I would constantly get people saying, you know, people like my grandma and and other people like that, what's a curator? And of course, you know, traditionally you get a curate in the church, because it comes from the Latin curare, to care for, you know. So, and actually it's about caring for a collection and caring for a body of knowledge or whatever. And so, you know, it's a very appropriate term. I mean, I get, and so at that point in time, I was constantly explaining to people when I was a student what art history was, because loads of people didn't think it was a real subject, and it was, you know, and I would get other students who would be really sniffy about, you know, they thought it was just a load of posh girls, and actually, you know, art history is a subject which is about society, it's about history, it's about philosophy, it's about psychoanalysis, it's about politics, but it's just all of those things through a prism of visual art. And by extension, a curator isn't just, I mean, you know, and one of the things I always found very frustrating was that people would just think that I spent my time moving pictures around. You know, what do you do all day? I mean, you know, once you've hung the pictures. And I was like, well, actually, it's not me that hangs the pictures. We're doing the research. We're doing the administration. You're working with collectors to get the loans. You're writing books, publishing, for fundraising, all of those things. And it's an incredibly complicated thing. I think now there's a lot more interest because of things like, I don't know, Fake or Fortune and things like that. People get the idea of the kind of the detective work that has to go into putting into researching artworks and how they connect to things. I think one of the other things was when Prince William went to go and do art history at St Andrews, suddenly the whole of Middle England knew what art history was. And it became this aspirational subject. But I think also there's been this thing with curators. People now talk about curating a menu, curating a music list, you know, that it's gone from being something that people never heard of to something that's almost kind of ubiquitous in a way. I've kind of got over that slightly now. I used to get really frustrated by it, but it's you know, we should share the term, let everyone have it. It's yeah.
I mean, I wonder now as well, at a time where in Britain, particularly, we're kind of, particularly in a lot of cultural institutions, trying to re-engage with our colonial past and better understand the framework within which we've viewed kind of the works of the world that we potentially kind of pillaged from other cultures, but then also sort of borrowed from culturally. And at a point where there's a big drive to reimagine art history, or at least kind of find in art history the places where those that have been making work have been underrepresented. Particularly looking at the exhibitions that have brought out kind of women artists of the Renaissance recently, and the kind of role of the curator seems more and more important for actually digging back and questioning received understandings of art history, it seems.
Absolutely. I mean, I think exhibitions and institutions have a role to play in asking questions, but also creating a framework for understanding our visual culture. And I think it's important that we do question that, because actually in the past it was a whole series, and actually this is one of the things which has changed with the teaching of art history, actually, that it's become about questioning those narratives. It is not necessarily just an accepted narrative of Michelangelo, Leonardo, and so on. And actually, when in my first term at Warwick University, I had a good primer, because I did this course called it was basically about methodologies of art history, and I did a seminar all about feminist interpretations of the Italian Renaissance. And when you're kind of 18, 19, something like that blows your mind, because you're suddenly, I'd never heard of half these. And actually, with the people we were looking at were people like Artemisia Gentileschi, Sofonisba, Anguissola, all of these people who are now being reappraised. And it's amazed me that it's taken that long for it to come from a rather kind of arcane bit of art history into something which, the National Gallery is now celebrating, almost because of external pressures. I mean, it should have happened a long time ago. But I think, it is something that institutions everywhere, I mean, it's something we're very much thinking about. I mean, I'm conscious that when I joined Pallant House Gallery in 2002, we had very, very few women artists in the collection. I mean, it was very, very limited. And we've acquired a great many. I mean, we've kind of got about something like 800 artists in the collection, but it's quite shocking, but there's actually only 23% of them are female artists. But actually it's way better than about the 4% we had about 20 years ago. So I think it's one of the things is it's a work in progress. It's something that, and it's easier for an institution like Pallant House Gallery to address that imbalance than it is for the National Gallery, because of course you can't rewrite history. You can create different ways of looking at it. You can bring other people to the fore. But I mean, if those artists didn't have the opportunities in the 16th, 17th, 18th century, you can't bring them from nowhere. But actually in the 20th century, there were a huge number of women artists. They just haven't necessarily always been given that kind of focus. And I think, what we've done in recent years, I mean, in a year ago, we had the exhibition Radical Women, and we worked with a wonderful curator called Alicia Foster, who'd come to me a couple of years before, and it was basically an exhibition about the women associated with Vorticism in the 1910s, and the suffragette movement, and abstract creation in the 1930s, and the 7 and 5s, and really interesting figures, and actually bringing together this story. And I think there is a real appetite that people want to know more about. Why do we know about them? And actually the work is often really good. And I think one of the things we've also tried to do is to work with collectors. I mean, most of our collection has been donated, and it's been given by individuals, or it's been bequeathed by individuals. And so in many ways, unless you've got huge budgets for acquisitions, which we don't, you are dependent on the generosity of others. I mean, but this is where conversations, I think, with collectors are really important, that actually, and where organizations like the Art Fund and various other kind of fundraising bodies that are really understanding that need for museums to improve the gender balance, but also to diversify the artists in their collection. And I think this is something, particularly since Black Lives Matter, there's been a huge amount of interest in, you know, who is represented in our collections and how. And I think also those questions of institutions like the British Museum and things like Benin bronzes, and it's very associated with questions of fairness in society, and actually Britain's very, very heavy colonial history that we have to be conscious of. And I think, you know, that it is important that we think about these things, and that we try to address them in our displays, and realize that modern Britain is not a purely white dead male entity. It's you know, it's got a huge amount of diversity in it.
And I mean, I wonder how that sits in the context of Chichester as well, which is a sort of very white middle class Southern English city. How do you find there's a lot of community engagement with the attitude that you're trying to take at Pallant House towards diversifying your collection?
It's an interesting question, because I mean, we have a very active community program, and one of the things about the community program is the participants on that whole range of different people. I mean, neurodivergent, I mean, in terms of range of various kind of disabilities, you might say. But I mean, it's not an ethnically diverse community, but actually you don't have to go too far to Portsmouth and Bognor and places like this, where there are communities of you know, in the past there've been quite a lot coming from places like Iraq and other places as refugees. But actually the gallery has a national program. You know, we lend our collection to institutions all around the country and abroad. You know, I think in the last 5 years, we've had several hundred loans to museums around the world. And we seek to have a collection which is, you know, British art from 1900 to now, and we have international works as well. But actually, that changes the way you think about it. It's, you know, although our immediate geographical location is really important to us, and our immediate community and how we engage them, a lot of our visitors come from London, they come from Brighton, they come from Southampton, and they, you know, people will be drawn to our exhibitions from across the country. But I think one of the other things that we're really conscious of at the moment is that with digital events, you can reach audiences all over the world. And so our program should connect to a sense of place, but it should also connect to other things around, you know, issues across the country, really. And you know, it's that funny thing. We're looking at this slide at the front of the gallery, and it looks like this perfect English Queen Anne townhouse. But of course, you know, actually alongside it, we've built modernist extension, a kind of contemporary wing. I can't remember what I've actually got going through. If I try and move through some, I mean, actually, the Philpott, of course, is very kind of apt in terms of this discussion, and we're working on an exhibition of Glen Philpott at the moment, which will be taking place in 2022, and part of that is it's very important that we consult on the issues within that. I'm sorry, I feel good. I've got these rather random pictures as I talk about rather weighty issues. We'll go back to the Glen Philpott. And so we've actually created an advisory group to discuss some of the issues around you know, race and gender that come up in the exhibition, to make sure that we're actually addressing them in a way. I'm very conscious that I am a white male curator, and I think it's really important that I listen to other people's views and feelings around this, that, you know, that as we shape that exhibition and the dialogues around it. It's quite important. And so, people I've been speaking to, like the cultural critic Cabena Mercer, is going to be part of it. I've been speaking to Isaac Julian and others, that we're able to think about, what makes an artist who died in 1937 relevant to today. And I think that's always an important question that we have to ask with any exhibition to do. Why is that artist and their work, why does it have a power for us in 2021?
And I suppose in the context of contemporary artists and a contemporary context, the acquisition of work by contemporary artists from a diverse range of backgrounds, I suppose, must be an important part of Pallant's future plan. I know you recently acquired Rachel Jones's A Sliced Tooth for the Pallant House collection.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's really important, and we were so delighted. I mean, we announced it yesterday, in fact, and I've got an image of it here somewhere. So Rachel Jones is a young British painter. She's relatively recently graduated from the Royal College of Art, and is producing really beautiful and really thoughtful oil stick paintings. We've actually acquired a diptych with the support of the Contemporary Art Society's Rapid Response Fund, which was created last year in COVID, and we've acquired a work which has come from Thaddeus Ropac Gallery from her first show, but she's being bought by museums in the United States, and we're actually the first institution, and Towner has also just acquired one. So we're the first institutions in this country to be buying her work. And I think it's important that, if we can, we try to diversify collection. The other things, I mean, we've in the last year acquired prints by Sonia Boyce and Chris Ofili, and actually recently the Hepworth Wakefield has just released a series of new prints. And actually, I do have some images. I'm going to scroll through past pictures of Brighton Beach and some books. I'm going to just to these. I'll come back to those. I'm going to. Oh, where are they? Where are they?
And I'll just take this opportunity to say to everyone, we're going to take questions at the end. So thank you everyone that's asked questions so far. Do feel free to pop questions in the Q&A, and I'll put those to Simon shortly.
So this is the Rachel Jones A Sliced Tooth. And it's a diptych, and it's a series of paintings that she's created around images of the mouth, and they're so beautiful. I mean, the coloration surfaces. But I mean, other works. I mean, this is a work I helped acquire a couple of years ago by Degas through the Acceptance in Lieu scheme. Peter Blake, Rachel Whiteread, Michael Craig Martin. I was going. Where is the other one? Where is the other one? I had some pictures of the school prints that we've just acquired by Claudette Johnson and Yinka Shonibari. And so, immediately they were released. The Frank Bowling sold out within half an hour, and the Herman Anderson. But I mean, it's important that we try to increase visibility of artists of color and subject, sitters in our collections and displays.
And kind of broadening that discussion about diversity as well. You've spoken that Glenn Philpott was obviously a gay man working kind of in the turn of the century, at a point where that must have been a socially difficult position for him to be in. And you're a trustee of Charleston as well, obviously with the Bloomsbury Group, with a
I can find the picture of Charleston here.
LGBT plus focus. I mean, what brought you to Charleston? Kind of, how did that come about?
Well, I've written a lot about modern British art over the years, and probably about 10 years ago, Charleston acquired a work called Iceland Poppies by Vanessa Bell, and they received money from the Heritage Lottery Fund, and I was approached to write a research piece around that painting, which is one of Vanessa Bell's earliest works. And so I wrote the piece and I gave a lecture, and I then was asked to join their exhibitions group. And Norbert Linton, the art historian who taught at Sussex University, had recently retired, I think, and actually he died not so long after that. But I was asked to fill that place on the committee. So it was myself, John Gill, who's the director of Brighton Photo Biennial and subsequently a chair of Camden Art Centre, and Anne Olivia Bell, who was Vanessa Bell's daughter-in-law, and Hilary Lane, and we had this. We used to kind of meet in the kitchen at Charleston, and then eventually we actually said to them, you know, we actually advised that we disbanded the group because actually they didn't have the conditions at that point in time. And then a few years later, I was asked to become a trustee, and so I'm actually coming up to the end of my term. I mean, I've been a trustee for 6 years now, but I love Charleston. I mean, it's an extraordinary place. I'm interested, of course, in the lives of artists and how they express themselves through their art, but also I think through their interiors. And I think one of the things that people are fascinated about with Charleston is how it presents a sense of visual escape. And of course, the Bloomsbury Group included Virginia Woolf, the writer, her sister Vanessa Bell, the painter, Duncan Grant, who at one point was in a relationship with Vanessa, and of course lived with her for many years, but was predominantly gay and had various, you know, people say about the Bloomsbury Group, of course, you know, living in squares and loving in triangles, and I think it's endlessly fascinating for that you know, reason. And I think one of the great things for me is to have been a trustee during a period of tremendous change, as you know, at Charleston, we created the new Barnes conversion and a really ambitious kind of future plan, and I think currently rethinking its role as a place for kind of questioning, you know, has been a really interesting thing to be part of.
That's fab. Thank you. Now, just to go to some of the questions, because we have had a few already. Zin's actually asked just to describe the life, kind of a day in the life of a curator or director. So I suppose as director, the last year's probably been quite abnormal for you. So I guess that also sort of brings us into what's it been like. I'll get to Zin's question probably shortly, but what has it been like navigating COVID as a director of a cultural institution?
I mean, it's been tricky, to be honest, but I mean, I think I'm generally a very optimistic person, and I've spoken to colleagues in other galleries, and, you know, and it's awful. And actually, you know, it's the day we had to close, which was almost a year ago last week. Was a year ago last week. It was the 17th of March 2020 was the day that we decided to shut the door, and in the lead up to that, we had, you know, we've got various advisory groups and committees that we talked through what is the process for shutting down a gallery in terms of the security, in terms of the environmental conditions of caring for the works, in terms of all of the messaging to audiences and the press, and so many things, you know, that we had to think about. I mean, all of these staff who were suddenly initially just kind of, I mean, they weren't laid off, they were just at home, but trying to make sure that we were caring for, you know, over 30 to 40, I mean, including part-timers, there's around 40 staff, with a variety of different anxieties about themselves and their families, how to communicate with all of the lenders that have got work on loan to the gallery to reassure them that their works are okay and that we're looking after them, making sure that the security of the building was okay during that time. And very quickly, of course, you know, we had this first Zoom meeting with my senior management team, which was a complete disaster, and nobody knew how to use anything, and kind of people speaking and cameras were not working, but very quickly we got into this kind of routine, and I was then having regular meetings with my board of trustees, and then, you know, a lot of of the last 12 months, 9 months have been pretty much spent at home, which has been, the background you can see here has been the room I've been spent most of this year. But we did manage to get the gallery open again in August. And so the 5th of August, we reopened. We managed to reschedule all of those exhibitions, but we also, we are £350,000 down on income this year on what we would normally be. So there's all kinds of, the need to fundraise to fill those gaps, the need to save money. We've had to do kind of restructure, and there have been a couple of redundancies, and those kind of things have been a massive learning curve for me individually, and incredibly difficult to have to go through that with your colleagues, and to try and keep everyone together and feeling supported in a very difficult situation. And I found that emotionally very, very draining as well, particularly when you're not all together. You're doing it through Zoom calls, and trying to be present for people is a lot of time on the phone, a lot of time doing Zoom calls, and trying to make sure that we're still getting press coverage so that we're in people's, people are aware of the gallery. And one of the things that, and we have a remarkable team, and I mentioned the community program, and there's about 190 individual participants, but a lot of those are not necessarily digitally connected, and so they are adults who are often in supported settings, and they're very used to kind of coming in and having regular kind of workshops and things like this. And so Lucy from our community team was then sending out resources to them and doing telephone buddies schemes and kind of pop-up exhibitions with postcards, and so a lot of trying to make sure that all of those things that we would ordinarily be doing in person were happening. But we got the gallery open, and actually the exhibitions we had, Barnett Friedman and Gilbert White, got 5-star reviews in Telegraph and the Observer, and so people came back, and we had timed ticket slots, and it's forced us in a way to engage with a new digital reality. And I think that's been a really good thing, because we can reach much bigger audiences. We can for our program, in the past we'd have 80 people maximum in a gallery talk, and now you can have any number. I mean, we've had 500 people or more at events online. So I think it's trying to turn every challenge into an opportunity, and it has been tiring, I have to say. I mean, a lot, long days, I think, as well, and that's why I've really loved being in Brighton, where I'm minutes walk from the beach and can go down to the sea and clear my head, and at a time when I'm not really able to see people socially. It's been amazing to have that, really.
Well, you obviously do long days. It's still being 7:48 and you're on Zoom working. I should return. I feel like I didn't ask Zin's question specifically enough. So in a kind of a day at the moment, kind of with things as they are, what kind of things might you do in your role as director?
I mean, today, for example, this morning, 9:15 this morning, I had a finance and investment committee meeting with some of my trustees and investment advisors. So we were talking about our endowment funds, cash flow, the forward plan, what we're going to do about the deficit that we're facing because of the lack of income. And so that was the first meeting. Then I went into a trustees meeting for 2 hours with my board of trustees. And so we were talking about, we had a presentation about, we've just had a people's survey was done a year ago with all of our staff. And so the person that did that was talking about the recommendations for, how people feel about being in the organization. What are the things we can improve in terms of recruitment and things like this. And then I was talking about new acquisitions, and we were talking about various different projects, and our digitalization project, and our cafe, and our bookshop, and various things. I mean, that 2 hours kind of went through, and our forward plan, which, of course, it's the end of the financial year next week, so that was all being approved, and what we're doing it has to be submitted to the Arts Council, and we're an Arts Council national portfolio organisation. So there's a lot of politics that comes into the role as well. And then that finished, I had some lunch. We're making press announcements about our summer exhibition, the Ben Nicholson. So there's been a lot of emails going backwards and forwards with our PR and sorting out various kind of things to do with the press release announcements. I had calls with my wonderful PA Becky to follow up from the meeting this morning and what we're doing about the minutes, and then with my head of audiences and development about the fundraising campaign that we're about to be launching, and trying to sort out the look of some of the material we're sending out. So my days tend to be very bitty. There's a lot of checking in with people, trying to make sure that things are going in the right direction. Huge number, I mean, hundreds of emails. That's the thing I find really difficult to keep on top of. But then around that, I mean, I'm also working, I think it's really important to you know, I like to keep my hand in with kind of writing and curating. So I've been working on a book about the natural historian Gilbert White, and we had an exhibition last year to mark his tercentenary, the 300 years since he was born, and I think and I commissioned 11 artists to create new work in response to his book, A Natural History, the Natural History of Selborne, which is all about the birds, the birds, the bees, the nature of his village, which was written in the 18th century. And so I commissioned artists like Mark Hurld, Emily Sutton, Christopher Brown, Alice Paciullo, Ed Clues, Michael Kirkman, Clive Hicks-Jenkins, Angie Lewin, a whole series of printmakers, Tristan Sherwood, Joe Sweeting, the wonderful kind of sculptor Joe Sweeting in Brighton. And so I've been working on writing that book after the exhibition, because I think a lot of those issues to do with ecology and to do with looking after nature and the representation of nature have become very, very present. And I think particularly during the last year, everyone's been going for walks in the countryside and thinking about, how do we record nature? How do we protect it and preserve it? How do we notice it? And so I'm hoping to get that done. We've just had a film that we've produced, funded by the South Downs National Park, and I managed to get Hugh Bonneville, the actor, to do the voiceovers of Gilbert White, and so we're going to release that soon. So there's always a lot of different, and then checking in with our head of exhibitions about loan requests for the exhibition this summer. So huge number of different things, really.
That's really interesting. Thank you. Now, just to cover a couple more of the questions, just to give everyone a bit of an overview, we've got 8 minutes left, but after 8 o'clock, if you did want to join us for our follow-up pub trip, it's a nice opportunity for all of us to chat and to be able to kind of talk about the things Simon's been discussing between ourselves. So I'll share a link to that when we hit 8 o'clock, and we will finish promptly at 8. So we've got 7 minutes left. Now, Adrienne here, I think, has asked whether you had any thoughts regarding the Department of Culture, Media and Sport slavery review with regard to some of your earlier points. And it's not something I know anything about, so I didn't know if you had any thoughts you could share on that at all.
I mean, I have to confess, I mean, I wouldn't want to give an opinion on it because I haven't read it yet. So until I've read, I mean, I wouldn't want to go on record commenting on it without fully understanding and appreciating it. And I think that's, but it is, you know, it is something that every institution has to think about, you know. And I think, you know, Britain has, for better or worse, has a colonial legacy. And a lot of that is very problematic. And, you know, we speak about Great Britain, but some of these things are not so great. And, you know, we have to be conscious that a great number of people suffered in order to build our country houses and our great buildings. And whilst we might take pride in those, and I, as somebody, you know, as somebody, I mean, I showed, of course, that slide very early on of where I went to school, which was this extraordinary Palladian country house, which was very inspiring to me as I grew up and has kind of shaped my interest in art and culture. But you know, that doesn't mean to say we shouldn't be conscious of those who weren't so fortunate, who might have funded that, and I think it's at the same time, not everybody wants to be constantly harangued, and they want to go to a national trust property and have a cream tea and go for a walk in the grounds, and so there is a balance, I think, to find with that actually understanding that culture is still a very powerful thing, that these issues are important, that we consider them and think about them. And the problem is often national trust properties will often find the simplest narrative to tell. So they'll find an interesting character from their history and they'll completely focus on them. And of course, there've often been several hundred years of history aside from that one individual who might be an extraordinary great person, or they might be very problematic. And I think it's finding, and of course people's attention spans are quite short as well. And I think, there's a tendency for things to be very soundbitey when of course actually they're very complex, nuanced and difficult. And I think that's one of the challenges, I think, with any of these issues is to find a way through which is thoughtful and meaningful, and without kind of sidelining parts of the history.
Thank you. Now I'll just give two more questions if that's okay. And first of all, Chris asks whether you're likely to revive your links with Outside In, and said how inspiring he found those exhibitions at Pallant House.
That's a really good question. I mean, Outside In is a charity, is a wonderful charity that supports marginalized artists to find a voice in the art world. And it was actually founded by my co-director, who I was directing. I mean, he was Mark Steen, who was our head of learning engagement at the gallery. And then we both became co-directors in 2013. And we were co-directors. I was the artistic director. He was the executive director for 4 years. And then in 2017, Outside In became a separate charity. Actually, this spring, every 2 years, we work on a co-commission. And so this spring, in January, we were due to open our co-commission. And I was on the selection panel for that co-commission. And the co-commission with Pallant House Gallery and Outside In is for an artist, one of the Outside In artists, to respond to the work of Madge Gill, who is a really wonderful, extraordinary outsider artist who lived in Walthamstow, and there have been exhibitions of her work. And we had quite a lot of artists applied. I mean, even from as far away from as India, and we shortlisted, I think, five artists, and then we did the interviews over Zoom. Myself, Cornelia, the curator of Outside In, and 2 of the Outside In artists actually who were supported to take part in the interview process. And we selected an artist called Julia Oakes, and by kind of wonderful kind of fortuitous circumstances, she's also she's been a long-standing Outside In artist, but she's also a member of our community program. And Julia is going to have an exhibition in the print room of Pallant House Gallery when we reopen, so the 18th of May. And it will be the drawings that she's been creating over the last couple of months in response to Madge Gill, together with some of Madge Gill's works. And we're working on a number of things. We're going to do a kind of postcard project that she's working on sending out so that people have something tangible. We're going to do a short film. We're going to have a virtual private view. And so that will be on for 2 months. And actually Mark and I have regular catch-ups as well, because we're kind of sister organizations in a way. So absolutely. And I've bought myself work by artists from Outside In exhibitions. Ian Warnos, one of the artists whose works and is supported at Action Space in London, and I bought one of his works from one of the Outside In fundraising exhibitions. So I think these things are really important to support.
That's really great to know. Thank you. As a final question, and whilst you're sharing your answer to this, I'm just going to pop some little things in the chat as extra links for people to read up.
Go back to both of us. There we go. We can.
Oh, Hello. Alejandro asks, what advice you would give to young artists? And this will be our final question, so we'll finish on this.
I mean, that's goodness. Where to start? I mean, I think it's really important for young, how young is young. I mean, I think one of the things with artists is you can become an artist at any point in your career, and I think there are people who will do career changes to become artists. I think it's in a very uncertain time to become an artist, and I think going to exhibitions, going to private views, going to degree shows, and seeing the work that's being created, I think is really, really important. I think taking part in things like Draw Brighton are very important. I mean, actually, the opportunity to, I think often the scariest things are artist crit sessions, where people being able to know how to be supportive of each other and to ask the right questions to develop work, I think is always a difficult skill. I mean, I actually in my second year at university did fine arts as one of the options, and at the end of the year we had an exhibition. I probably put more time into that part of my degree than I did any of the academic stuff at the same time. So I thought about it a huge amount, and I think that's really important to actually, that people, the thought and the consideration and the looking that needs to happen in order to create good work. I mean, I think art is primarily about connection between thinking and looking, and yes, there are other you can have sound art and things like this, but that connection, I think, is absolutely vital, and you need to think. And a great draftsman, whether somebody is the most technically accomplished draftsman or an abstract artist or a conceptual artist, that is absolutely at the heart of it. And that's the heart of, you go to a gallery like Pallant House Gallery, it's a haptic experience. It's about the pleasure we can derive, or the way it makes us think, and the way it makes us think about the world and ourselves and about others. So yeah.
I think that's a wonderful note to end on, a call for us to all go out and look and think in response to the world around us. That's wonderful. Simon, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been a real pleasure to talk, and really exciting directions that we've gone in as well that I couldn't have predicted.
Pleasure. Thank you so much. Slightly random, slightly little bit, this is your life, but thank you very much for inviting me.
I hope that you enjoyed this talk. It was brought to you by Draw Brighton and is part of an ongoing series of monthly interviews. Hit subscribe to be kept up to date with more. To support what we do and for more information about Draw, take a look at our Patreon via the links in this video.